What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Today, I have with me a board-certified anesthesiologist and longevity physician, Dr. Joshua Hackett.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body Podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Hackett.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you and I connected a while ago. Took me a while to get you on the show, but that's okay. You're here now. You wrote a book. Tell us the title of the book and the basic premise behind what drove you to write it.
Yes, it's called the GLP-1 Lifestyle. And it's basically about transforming your metabolism, whether you're using semaglutide or not. The basic idea of it was actually to help people who are considering GLP-1 agonisms, but not wanting to actually take the plunge for the medication. And so it's about optimizing your GLP-1 naturally. And that's again, whether or not you're taking the medications, it's going to help regardless. It's going to help you transition on and off semaglutide. And the primary premise of it is that GLP-1 is an extremely important hormone for everybody. And likely looking like healthy people who have been chronically thin, have never had any issues with their weight, probably have had optimized GLP-1 all along. And so the idea of the book was just to kind of give an idea of why that is and some strategies to increase it for everybody else. And again, if you're wanting to get off the medication or you're wanting to optimize your use of the medication, it also helps with that.
Absolutely. And so for the audience, GLP is glucagon-like peptide 1. So Wegovy, Mounjaro, semaglutide, they're slightly different mechanisms, but correct me if I'm wrong, Mounjaro is a GLP-1 and a GIP, correct?
Correct. So the GIP is kind of the developing one currently. And a lot of the same mechanisms apply to GLP-1 and GIP-1 or GIP. It's just that GIP is going to add a little bit of the help with the glucagon secretion versus just the GLP-1. Whereas the GLP-1 is mostly going to focus on the appetite regulation, blood glucose regulation, and gastric motility. You're going to get a bit more of the glucagon secretion with GIP. And of course, I'm getting ahead of myself with that, but
yeah. So let's talk about some of the hunger hormones. Most people, they know insulin. They may have heard of ghrelin, but tell us about the hunger hormones, glucagon, ghrelin, leptin.
Yeah. So ghrelin is kind of the classic hungry hormone as far as hunger hormones go. And it's the one that is dysregulated in a lot of obese people. And so with ghrelin secretion, it's secreted by the stomach. And it's secreted in times where the body feels like it needs nutrients, it needs food. And so you'll see an increase in that with fasting. You'll see an increase in that with typical times where you would think the body would want food. The problem is that it's coming from the brain down to the stomach. And if your brain has signals that are not correct or not optimized, you're going to get signals to your stomach to secrete ghrelin in times when you're not truly hungry or not truly needing nutrient support, right? So that's why ghrelin dysregulation can increase your appetite, can increase your calorie consumption. And we see it a lot in obese individuals. And so Leptin is kind of the counterpart to ghrelin. Leptin is the primary hormone that we have to keep our appetite in check and keep our energy regulation in check. So leptin resistance is what we see a lot of times in obesity.
Absolutely.
And what's happening there is that your leptin signals are being blocked, or leptin is not able to do its job and its ability to do energy partitioning. And so in a normal person with leptin sensitivity, leptin is actually releasing energy from adipocytes or fat tissue, or storing from adipocytes. And so again, with that ratio of ghrelin and leptin, that's actually a pretty significant factor as far as weight loss is considered. And I think in the last 5 years, I think we're kind of figuring that out, and it's going to become an even bigger issue, I think, in the next decade or so. So insulin is your classic glucose regulated hormone. It is secreted when we get nutrients into the body. So typically carbohydrates are insulin secreting. Insulin is secreted from the pancreas, and it's going to basically partition blood glucose from the blood into tissues. So insulin response, everybody has it. Now, again, that there's a varying factor as far as your insulin response to food. There is insulin resistance, which we can talk about later. Another huge factor in obesity as well. Glucagon is the counterpart to insulin. So glucagon is released, which will actually increase your blood glucose. So it's the opposite factor to insulin. The GLP-1 agonists increase your insulin secretion, which increases your partitioning from glucose from the blood to tissues, whereas glucagon will be the opposite, from tissues into blood.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that explanation. And I know in your book, you talk a lot about our circadian cycle, our 24-hour cycle, and circadian biology, and how that ties into pretty much all of our physiological reactions. Our, exposure to sunlight, we're basically large solar panels. I know if I have just one night of poor sleep, if I stay up too late, that the next day I'm not only eating more calories and craving simple carbohydrates, whereas I typically don't crave them. Can you talk about circadian biology and how that ties into our hunger?
It deserves a book on its own. So it's a huge thing. And so, I think versus speaking to, the whole of circadian biology, I think maybe we'll just go into what we can do to kind of realign it. Our light cycles are huge. I think it's probably the biggest factor that most of us are missing. Blue lights, LEDs, all these things that we have going on TV screens, computers, smartphones, etc., bombarding our eyes, our skin all day long, right? Pretty much from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we have a screen in our faces. And again, I think the last 5 years to a decade, this has become a much bigger factor, and it's going to continue to become so. And that's been the biggest change as far as health is regarded, in my opinion, lately, because circadian biology is the number one thing you need to be doing as far as getting yourself realigned, and then everything from there kind of falls into place. So it's absolutely the foundation of the pyramid, in my opinion. So GLP-1 is extraordinarily tied to everything circadian, which was a huge surprise to me when writing this book. I didn't realize how much I knew about ghrelin and leptin as far as their importance within the circadian biology. But GLP-1 is right there with them, and it has its effects in blue light and sunlight exposure. And so to get into it and kind of summarize it, basically, we want to have light as soon as the sun is up, and we want to not have light once the sun goes down, to put it simply. And so what we're looking to do is have like a protein-rich meal first thing in the morning. And we're looking to get morning light into our eyes right away. And we can actually do blue light in the morning, because that's a normal circadian biological entrainment. But we want to shut the blue light off as soon as the sun goes down. So there's some videos out there about how to turn red light onto your phone, and there's Iris, and there's all these software programs now for your computer. There's starting to be some things for your TV, although that's a little bit more rare. So my suggestion is just to turn the television off. But Yeah, I feel a little bit overwhelmed by that question because there's so much there with circadian biology. And I think it's more of a factor of just kind of each individual stepping back and kind of looking at what they're doing as far as when they wake up,
Right.
their light environment, what they're doing in the morning, what kind of light they're seeing at night, and the amount of outdoor connection they're getting as well. Because most of us are sitting behind a computer screen all day. We have fluorescent lights on us all day. Then we come home into our home, we turn on the lights again, we turn on the TV. And I think just taking a step back in your own life and kind of considering what am I doing to see natural light throughout the day is an
Right.
absolute huge ordeal. And I think one of the cool things about circadian biology is you'll feel that right away in your life. I mean, all of us can think back to a day when we've been out in the sun all day long, from the morning to night. We don't turn the TV on. We're in Mexico, we're on vacation, whatever. How well we sleep and how good we feel compared to when we've been under fluorescent lights all day at work and we come home and we have a headache and we just feel completely stressed out. And then we sleep like crap also.
Right.
So maybe that'd be a topic for another podcast because it really is like that's a monster. But it's a huge
Yeah.
thing, I think, for people to step back and kind of see for themselves.
Yeah. Back in, I think it was 2010, Jack Cruz was the neurosurgeon was the first one to introduce me to circadian biology, non-native EMFs. I've been thinking basically, well, exclusively biochemically. I'm a biochem physiology nerd. And, the fact that our biophysics basically drive the biochemistry, we're electromagnetic beings. And I think a lot of people, at least a lot of the clients I work with, they'll spend $2,000 in a red light therapy device, or they'll, get a molecular hydrogen machine. But if I say get morning sunlight for 30 minutes, they're like, well, it's free. So we associate free with not being valuable. That in this case couldn't be further away from the truth.
Correct. Yeah, I thought you were a Jack Cruz fan as well. I couldn't remember exactly, but I've been following Jack for a long time.
Yeah. So if you
And
look
he
at the
was,
Heal Your Hormones boot camp on his website, I created that.
that's right. I remember that now. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I've been a huge fan for a while. I was a part of his platinum group for a long time, and I learned so much from him.
Yeah.
Uh, such a brilliant guy, and bringing such simplicity to the world of health. That's my favorite part about him.
Yeah.
But like you said,
Absolutely.
it depends on the context, depends on the group of people. But you're right. If it's free, then it kind of is met with some skepticism for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing is looking at sunlight, the cortisol awakening response. Our cortisol levels should be highest, in the morning and mid-morning, and then lowest in the evening. And our body gets confused when we have the wrong light environment. Not to mention, if we're indoors, we're being exposed to more non-native EMFs. We're still exposed to 5G and things outside, but not as much as if we're sitting by our Wi-Fi router, or if you have a Wi-Fi router. And then dopamine levels. So dopamine, we know it's the reward neurotransmitter, but it's important for energy and focus and motivation. And sunlight does a lot for dopamine, correct?
It does. Yeah, it absolutely does. So it's the original dopaminergic tool that we had basically. And sunlight even we have opiate receptors that respond to sunlight as well. And that's, again, proven. Just go out into the sun for 15 minutes and tell me how much better you feel.
Right.
That's actually native opiate receptors. And so from our very humble beginnings, we've had a directive to be out in the sunlight, and most of the day, if not all of the day, every single day of our lives. So it's easy to see how easily we can become sunlight deficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is just the spectrum of light, like you talk about in your book. We don't just get vitamin D from the sun. I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, I got to get my vitamin D. Yeah, we do get that. But we also get the red light, the infrared light, the purple light, depending on the time of day you're out. In terms of the GLP-1s, I know I've seen people just take them and then their metabolic rate is slowed down because they aren't taking essential amino acids to preserve muscle mass. So their metabolic currency essentially goes down. You mentioned the concept of offsetting in your book. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how that ties into the GLP-1s?
Sure. So the idea of offsetting, as far as I go into the book, is in regards to the immune centric connection to fat loss. And so what we see a lot of times, and this is not specific to GLP-1 agonists, this is to any kind of weight loss, diet trend, anything. When one loses weight, that is a stress signal to the body. So again, you think back to thousands of years ago, if you have energy reserves, which are fat cells, this is actually a good thing, right? Because back then we weren't worried about eating 2,000 too many calories. We were much more worried about having too few calories. So when we have a big fat loss event, like we would only in modern times, you got to think. So we've been around for a few 100,000 years. We've had access to a surplus of calories for a very, very short amount of time in that time span. I think I wrote a number in the book. It was something like 99.97% of our existence as humans. We have had issues with getting enough calories. And so it's 0.03% of the time that we have had this ability to have a surplus of calories extremely easily. So to get to the point there is that we have many mechanisms in place that when we lose fat, it's a stress signal to our body saying that something is happening, right? There's some kind of huge issue that we don't have this surplus of calories anymore. We've lost our safety net. More than likely, we're probably near death. So we have many, many mechanisms in place that try to reverse that and try to get our fat cells and our energy reserves back in stock. So what offsetting is essentially safety stops. So we lose a certain amount of weight and then we do some offsetting, which tells our body that everything's fine and safe. We're doing this purposely. And as far as I know, I've never seen anything other than the Immunity Code, which is Joel Green's book, speaking to offsetting. And as far as I've seen from the people I've worked with and used it with, and even myself with building some more gut health parameters, it's a really, 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 really powerful thing to utilize. And so one of the main things with it is just stopping for a day and giving your body a satiety signal. So it's getting ghrelin and leptin back in check. It's making sure that your gut health is back in check. And it's doing that every few days and continuing those fat loss efforts for a longer period of time versus just trying to lose the 40 pounds and then stopping the medication, stopping whatever effort you're doing, and then expecting that the weight will stay off. The body doesn't work like that. And it would seem that when we lose weight, our bodies would think this is great, I'm healthier, etc. But it actually does not work like that.
Absolutely. And in terms of gut health, things like butyrate, akkermansia, they produce natural GLP-1, correct?
So akkermansia and butyrate both help with GLP-1 secretion and they help with GLP-1 sensitivity. And so they're two of a very important sequence of things that occur when you build your gut health back up. And I'm a part of a few Facebook groups that are GLP-1 centered. And actually just this morning, I was answering to somebody about what they can do for their gut health because same thing, she's seeing a stall out. So she'd lost a lot of weight. Now she's really starting to stall out and she's starting to see a lot of effects of inflammation occurring. It's like some bloating and nausea and some side effects coming back. And more than likely what that is inflammation and a decreased integrity of the gut. And so part of the story is akkermansia, part of the story is butyrate. But to me, the whole story there is your overall gut health. And just to introduce that concept quickly. So akkermansia is part of what I call commensal bacteria. So the commensal bacteria are the good guy gut bacteria. Our system, which is built of trillions of microbes, is meant to be primarily bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, and some bits of akkermansia. And there's many, many species within these. There's different strains, et cetera. But it's very important that most of our microbes be made up of those three. Those are kind of the good guy gut bacteria. And all of those, bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, they all have GLP-1 optimizing effects, and they're all an extremely important part of the offsetting that we just spoke of and keeping the weight off and optimizing your natural GLP-1.
Absolutely. In terms of other things, so I know you take a very holistic approach to weight loss. It's not just like, okay, eat less, move more, call it a day. We talked about the immune-centric approach, the M1, M2 macrophage, M1 pro-inflammatory, M2 anti-inflammatory, but breath work. So we had Sachin Patel on the show 4 or 5 months ago, maybe a little longer, talking about breath work. But how do you go about breath work? I know you just achieved a new milestone in terms of certification for an advanced breathwork instructor. Talk about the importance of breath work and also the difference between deep breathing and just breath work in general.
Sure. So, yeah, I'm part of Oxygen Advantage. I'm one of their instructors. To summarize breath work, essentially what it has to do with is the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve is one of our cranial nerves, but aside from it being just a cranial nerve, it's called the vagus nerve, and vagus in Latin means wanderer. So the idea of that essentially is that the vagus nerve travels the entire region of our body. There's really nothing that the vagus nerve doesn't touch and doesn't affect. And what we're seeing in our hyper-stressed community, or hyper-stressed society nowadays, is that our vagal nerve tone is quite poor. And so what breathwork does is it is the most effective way to very, very quickly get yourself back into a space where your vagal nerve tone is increased. And there's people use breathwork for many other kind of tactics, and they do it for different strategies and whatnot. But to me, 99% of us should be using breathwork strictly to increase vagal nerve tone. And number one, because it's so simple. Essentially, if you just extend your exhales longer than your inhales, you're going to increase vagal nerve tone. It's as simple as that. So if I take a simple breathwork exercise like the 4-7-8, where I'm inhaling for 4 seconds, I'm holding my breath for 7 seconds, I'm exhaling for 8 seconds. You do that for 5 minutes, your vagal nerve tone will increase an amount that's actually pretty extraordinary. And this can be proven, but you can see it in your heart rate variability. You can feel it in your headspace. You can feel it in your concentration. Your digestion will get better. Your sleep will get better. So it is absolutely something that everybody should be taking advantage of. And it's incredibly simple. It doesn't get much more simple than just thinking about the way you're breathing and letting that exhale go a little bit further than your inhales. The other thing that is huge for me and that a lot of people are not doing is nasal breathing. And I'm also very happy to see that it's increasing in popularity a lot nowadays. I'm seeing a lot more about nasal breathing, but it's a huge factor because it actually naturally causes those inhales and exhales. The ratios are actually naturally increased by just breathing through your nose. And you can test that on yourself. Just practice very consciously breathing through your nose versus your mouth, and you'll feel that you extend both the inhale and exhale through your nose, whereas the mouth is just a very, very quick kind of panting almost kind of thing. And that panting, what it does is increase your sympathetic nervous response. And we can get into CO2 and its effects and CO2 levels if you want, but suffice to say that sympathetic is the fight or flight response, and it's not what we're looking for most of our lives. And most of us tend to live in that space far more than we should. So we go back to those caveman days, which we've been already gotten into a lot. The kind of like paleo lifestyle thing is actually a pretty big factor. We were cooking, we were foraging, we were maybe hunting, but it wasn't a stressed out event. We were outside all the time. We were relaxing with communities. We were doing a lot of resting and digesting, and rest and digest is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is controlled by the vagus nerve. So that was the vast majority of our life, 200 years ago, even not very long ago.
Right.
And so we would have our events where if we saw a deer or an elk or whatever, and we wanted to quickly sprint and chase it, or alternatively, we had something chasing us. There were these events where the sympathetic nervous system was supposed to be activated, but it was very, very little. Whereas you look at nowadays, you look at all the things that stress us out, and it's everywhere. It can be from your boss, from an email from a manager. It can be from traffic. It can be from your kids. It can be from a stressful TV show. Even a horror movie causes sympathetic nervous response. So I don't think that most people realize how often we're in that stress response.
And the
And
more
so,
often we're in the sympathetic response, the more inflamed we'll be, correct?
correct. So the rest and digest goes right along with chronic inflammation and opposing that. So it's a de-inflammatory state by being in a rest and digest state. And the vagus nerve controls so much of inflammation. And it's not necessarily that the sympathetic nervous response is causing inflammation, it's just doing nothing to prevent inflammation.
Absolutely. And the vagus nerve is lined with acetylcholine receptors. And one thing I learned a long time ago is that people who are on benzodiazepines, because they deplete acetylcholine, it makes it even harder to come off of, in addition to the GABA receptor downregulation, because you have less acetylcholine, so you can't activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that's why they're so difficult to come off of, along with other things. But those are the two main ones. So breath work in terms of deep breathing, you mentioned 4-7-8 breathing. What is, when most people hear breath work, they assume deep breathing. Can you kind of differentiate between the two?
Yes, so that's going to get into the CO2 levels that I had discussed
Okay.
earlier. So there's been a bit of misinformation, I would say, and it's not anybody's fault. It's not, I don't think anybody was out to attack anyone or decrease anyone's health or anything like that. It's just that there became a thing where we started to believe that just breathing deep was relaxing breathing. And actually what's happening there is that when you take a breath in and you quickly exhale, you're just depleting your CO2 levels. And so one of the primary factors in increasing that exhale is actually increasing your CO2 levels. And CO2 is extremely important for nitric oxide production, for cardiovascular health, and for decreased inflammation, and actually a lot of things. And again, it's probably another separate book or podcast in and of itself. If anybody is interested, I highly suggest looking up Oxygen Advantage. Patrick McCown goes into CO2 levels. That's pretty much his life. But suffice to say, they are extremely important and shocking, the amount of things that CO2 actually controls as far as health goes. And I always try to keep things simple. I find that, just to take a little side note, I found that when I was coaching people, I would overcomplicate things too much and I just end up losing them very quickly. So now I'm kind of more into taking a simpler approach, and instead of explaining something too far in depth to lose everybody, instead just giving the practical advice for that. And so in this topic, suffice to say, CO2 is extraordinarily important, and simply pay attention to breath coming in and out of your nose, almost never through your mouth, even in exercise, and increasing that exhale, and just focusing, I would say, morning and night on just spending 10 minutes on the 4-7-8 breathing, or just one of the key things that you can do is just double your exhale compared to your inhale. And it's a very, very simple practice. You'll feel the benefits of it right away, and just you're going to get a lot of benefits from it.
When someone is beginning a breathwork practice, I mean, I know it's going to vary from person to person, but what's the minimum they need to do to see benefit? Is it 5 minutes a day?
So that's kind of similar to sunlight, and I'm sure by following Jack Cruz, I'm sure you've come across this as well. Like he says, there's really no limit and there's no minimum. So I can tell people that you should be doing breath work for 2 hours a day. They're not going to do it. I should tell people that you should see the morning sun from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. They're not going to do it. So if you're willing to spend a minute just focusing on exhaling longer than your inhale, and focusing through breathing through your nose, clearing your nostrils, and getting that system kind of more in check, amazing. A minute's perfect, because you might feel the benefits from that, and then you might do 2 minutes the next day. And, I think for me, 10 minutes per day of all of these practices, I think, is what really starts to make a big difference. And so you can, if you want to go outside and look at the morning sun for a minute, beautiful. Because I think the next day it'll be 2, then it'll be 3. And you'll find that 10 minutes is kind of that sweet spot. And I've kind of found that for a lot of things, even integrated intervals with exercise, and meditating. There's a lot of things where that sweet spot's kind of 10 minutes of our day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I do. So I do weight training for about 45 minutes, 10 minutes of intervals. I do that 4 to 5 times a week. And I notice a lot better energy, better body composition than just, getting on the elliptical or the treadmill for 45 minutes and running like a hamster on a wheel. But in terms of weight loss and hunger, so we talked about the GLP-1s, we talked about the immune-centric approach, we talked about inflammation, and breath work. What are some other variables that have to be considered? I know, with regards to gut health, you talk about prebiotics, probiotics, and postbiotics, and gut barrier integrity. Can you touch on why those are important?
Yeah. So to me, gut health is another one of those foundations of the pyramid for this whole thing. So I think that a lot of the issues with obesity and the struggles losing weight and the struggles keeping weight off have to do with gut health to begin with. And I think that if you lose weight, you're not going to find success long term unless you get your gut health in check. And again, I think in the last 5 years or so, this has really come to light. And we're going to see it only increase, and it's going to become a primary factor in primary care as well, very, very soon, in my opinion. So getting to probiotics, so that really has to do with the commensal bacteria that I was speaking to earlier. So the bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, akkermansia. And I have a lot of people asking me about whether they should take probiotics or not. I don't think it causes harm. There's some people that talk about it potentially proliferating in the small intestine and causing issues like that. I don't think that's a true concern, but I do think for the most part, it's a waste of money. And I think that what we need to work on is actually proliferating within ourselves. And so that's where prebiotics kind of come in. And if we go to, I'm a really big fan of Joel Green's work and his work on the immunity code. So I want to give him credit to this before speaking to it. This definitely comes from the immunity code. But what he has us doing in that is building gut bacteria from polyphenol consumption in the diet, and then following that up with resistant starches, with prebiotics to then proliferate the bacteria that we just built through berry consumption, fruit consumption, vegetables. And so that's a huge part that I have in the book as well. And it's somewhere in the back, section 5 or something like that. I think it goes maybe 200 pages in. But essentially what you're doing is you're consuming once or twice a week. It's nothing extreme. A lot of berries, a lot of polyphenols first thing in the morning. And those polyphenols have been shown to be extremely potent in proliferating good gut bacteria and actually pushing away proliferation of bad gut bacteria. And so consuming those berries first thing in the morning actually increases the amount of bacteria that are being produced in your system. And then we give that 3.5, 4 hours to work. And then we take those new bacteria that we just proliferated and we feed them with resistant starches like chickpeas, cooked and cooled potatoes, cooked and cooled rice. There's a lot of different prebiotics out there nowadays, and they're becoming even more popular. Doesn't make too big of a difference. It's just important that we feed those guys that we just built.
Right.
And again, this isn't something that we have to do every day. It's something that we do a couple times a week, and then we have other strategies that we plug in during the week. But I think much more than just taking a pill of probiotics and just hoping that some of them stick to the gut lining. Instead, let's build it out ourselves. And then once you build the gut integrity and you stop your leaky gut and you decrease some of the SIBO or the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that's occurring, once we get there, we can start to feed different species and different strains through probiotics. But in my personal opinion, taking a probiotic pill is actually a really advanced strategy that should only be used for people that have a healthy gut and are just trying to increase their diversity a little bit more.
Yeah, I've, been working on my gut health since 2005. And, for many years, I thought that, oh, you take a probiotic, it colonizes the large intestines, but, we know that it's a transient effect at best, versus something like the spore-based probiotics, which release 12 antimicrobial peptides, and they decrease lipopolysaccharide levels, the inflammatory compound from gram-negative bacteria, which cause massive systemic inflammation. So That's another way that gut health is connected to cardiometabolic health, brain health, and just overall systemic bodily health. So twice a week. So there's day one and day two. And I know he also has, if I remember correctly, a 10-day gut reset.
Yeah, so with the 10-day gut reset, you're going more into specifics with like using HMOs, like human milk oligosaccharides, and using like a red powder, which is kind of like the like consuming the berries. It's a similar kind of thing. But really, it's just an intensive way of approaching that 2-day approach that you just talked about. And so the 2-day approach is taking that 1 day of proliferating your good gut bacteria, and then using the postbiotics, which we can get into, from day one into day two for what is dubbed an amplified fast. And so you're using all the postbiotics and all the good things that occurred from that day one, and you're then now using all that to fast on day two, which increases there's a lot of health benefits to that. Decreases inflammation, and definitely an overarching health benefit to fast on that day two.
If someone has
So
a high, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so with the postbiotics, you mentioned antimicrobial peptides, which I also talk about in the book. So postbiotics are another emerging trend, and I think it's going to be an absolutely massive one in the next 5 to 10 years, because I'm starting to think that everything that has to do with gut health, a good strong portion of that has to do with postbiotics. And if you look at a list of proven postbiotics that we know of now, it's actually really, really phenomenal what these trillions of bacteria have the potential to produce themselves, which then create benefits for us. And so I think a lot of people know about butyrate. Has a lot of potential in decreasing leaky gut, has a lot of potential in increasing metabolic health. That's just one postbiotic that we just happen to know about, and it's produced a lot by bifidobacteria. But there are literally thousands of postbiotics, and I don't think we have any idea the level of health promotion that's occurring with good gut bacteria producing metabolites for us. So I just wanted to mention those antimicrobial peptides. That's a brand new one as well. So we have our good bacteria in producing these AMPs, which are then kicking out bad bacteria and promoting even more good gut bacteria, closing up the junctions in our gut, increasing the health of our gut. And so it's this constant positive cycle and positive multiplication that's occurring. And again, I don't think we have any grasp on the power of that. And I think it's going to be like a phenomenally important resource.
And when you say postbiotics, so I know butyrate, acetate, propionate are short chain fatty acids, but by definition, postbiotic, is that something you use after a probiotic, or what defines a postbiotic?
So a postbiotic is a metabolite of a probiotic. So it's something that a bacteria is producing, which can then be used for good or for bad. And there are negative postbiotics as well being produced by Firmicutes and Clostridium species and things like this. But for the most part, if we have that gut that has 90% good gut bacteria from the bifidobacteria and the lactobacillus, we're going to have all of their postbiotics, their metabolites, which we're finding more and more are incredibly health promoting.
Right. How long have you been practicing? 15, 20 years?
I've been out of residency for 7.
7. Okay.
Mhm.
So, what's something that you know today that you wish you would have known 7 years ago?
I'm going to stick with the same thing we've been talking about, gut health. I know we hear so much about gut health nowadays. It's becoming very trendy, so I almost feel cliche just saying it, but it's so critical. It's unbelievable. And I don't think, again, I'll say it for the 5th time, I don't think we have any idea how much these good gut bacteria are doing for us. Everything from muscle gain to weight loss to brain health to cognition to, I mean, anything you can think of. I think gut health has a primary factor in it.
Yeah,
And on the flip side of that, I'm just going to say, on the flip side of that, when you have poor gut integrity, the amount of diseases being caused from that, the amount of mitochondrial dysfunction being caused by that, and then the subsequent diseases being caused from that, massive factor.
I was looking at a presentation from David Perlmutter, and he was talking about how neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, typically gut dysbiosis precedes those diagnoses by at least 2 decades, possibly more. I think that's
Yep, and
huge.
that's just one little subset of disease. I think
Yeah,
you'd probably find something similar in every single subset of disease. Any bodily tissue, I think you find the same.
yeah, absolutely. Where people can find your book on Amazon, correct?
Yep. So I self-publish through Amazon.
Okay, awesome. And your website, we'll put up the link, but
Yeah, so currently I'm just running off of mostly just through Instagram and TikTok. I'm just kind of building a foundation based on the book for now, and then we'll kind of see how that goes and hopefully build out a website, and we'll see what the future holds with that. But for now, I'm just happy to get this book out and get it into people's hands, and just hoping to help as many people as possible. As I think this GLP-1 thing, I think what's great about it is that it's just bringing up health factors that have been important all along. And
yeah,
you're just tying it into this kind of popular term, GLP-1 or semaglutide or Ozempic, whatever. But
right.
as you know, all these things, all the things in the book we've been talking about for a decade, and people like Jack Cruz and Joel Green have been talking about even longer than that.
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hackett. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks for the work that you're doing. Keep it up, and hopefully we can have you back on in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a blessed day.
All right.